Take a look outside. Did you know that they call Callisto the dead moon? Dead. Just like you would have been if I hadn't fished you out of that wreck.
The Callisto Protocol was revealed during the Game Awards in 2020. It painted a new vision for sci-fi horror, a visceral, violent, gory, and utterly, relentlessly terrifying experience. Directed by Glenn Schofield, the original Dead Space creator, and much of the original development team. This is what so many had wanted for so long. A proper sequel to Dead Space, even if just a spiritual sequel, returning to the horror focus of the original game. Keep in mind that it was announced before the Dead Space remake, so at that time, it was the only Event Horizon-like horror experience waiting just over the horizon. The Callisto Protocol quickly became one of the most anticipated horror games ever, with hype building over the next 2 years. But hype can be a powerful, dangerous drug. It can make you see things as you want to see them, creating a high that's hard to live up to. It's not that expectations can never be met, but all too often, the dizzying highs of hype can lead to the crushing lows of disappointment. When the Callisto Protocol finally released, the come down was harsh and the backlash was swift. The game wasn't what the hype promised. A flood of negative reviews poured in, a mix of both earned and unearned criticisms. The game wasn't perfect. It certainly had its flaws, but many of the criticisms were lobbed at what people thought the game should have been, but wasn't.
Welcome to your new home.
Like many, I too was incredibly hyped for the game, and that hype turned to disappointment after seeing all those reviews. So I moved on, content to never play what was obviously a terrible game. But then I ran across it for only $5 less than a year after launch. And I figured I'm always down for some cheap trash, maybe it's worth a laugh. And I started to play it and I realized this game is good, like really good. And I wondered what's actually going on. So today, we're going to take a look at what happened, the most common criticisms, and why you should give this game another look. I'm Adam Scott, and this is the Callisto Protocol. The Callisto Protocol was developed by Striking Distance Studios, published by Krafton, and released on December 2nd, 2022, for PC as well as Xbox and PlayStation consoles. The story follows Jacob Lee, played by Josh Duhamel. Yeah, that Josh Duhamel, a starship captain who crash lands on the Jovian moon Callisto, only to be captured and incarcerated in a high-security prison. He's subsequently forced to fight for survival as a mysterious illness sweeps the prison, and gradually learns the dark secrets of his captors. The gameplay consists of exploring a series of levels, gathering resources, and collecting data logs while fighting off infected prisoners. But it wasn't Dead Space, and the backlash was immediate and fierce.
The Callisto Protocol is the newest game to come out this year, probably one of the last biggest games of this year, and what a terrible way to end 2022.
I did find this game incredibly disappointing in a lot of ways.
This is one of our most anticipated games of this year. And yeah.
And if all that weren't enough to put the bow on Jacob Lee's shitty day, he then has to spend the next 10 hours being the protagonist of a fucking awful video game.
So how did expectations get so out of whack? It's often the case where developers make promises they don't deliver on, whether due to budget or time constraints, technical limitations, or maybe they're liars with pants on fire.
Will you be able to play with your friends?
Yeah.
Is there a competitive element to this game?
Yeah, if you want that, yes.
Getting that competitive nature into a role-playing game. You're not the only hero around to do this job. You know, there are other heroes competing against
Duke Nukem Forever succeeds by understanding what was great there and delivering on a worthy successor to all that fun.
You should feel manipulated when this happens. How could you feel any differently? You were promised something other than what you got. So, is this what happened with the Callisto Protocol? No. In the numerous interviews Glenn gave in the lead up to the release with various game journalists, he was very clear with what to expect and described the game we ultimately got. There weren't any scrapped mechanics or gameplay footage that was used only in marketing. The team was even asked about the melee combat 5 months before release. Here's what they had to say.
The dodge system is very important to our game because it really separates us from a lot of other games in the horror genre.
What that is if you hold left on the left stick while an enemy's attacking, you will dodge their attack. And if they come back again and hit you again, you have to hit right. If you don't have the rhythm right, then you will get hit.
Nothing was oversold by the development team or the publishers. That doesn't mean the game wasn't sold as the second coming of Dead Space, mostly coming from journalists, commentators, or just fans connecting dots that didn't exist. Glenn was asked directly in multiple interviews about how similar the game is to Dead Space.
It's different story, different characters, different universe, different way we tell the story. We go really deep on story. The combat is different, enemies are different. I can't see people going, oh, that's Dead Space 4.
So as you can see, the backlash wasn't earned by the development team. The reviews were mostly negative, with the same 3 criticisms suspiciously repeated again and again. But I'm sure everyone had the same 3 thoughts, organically. Starting off with the main criticism against Callisto, the combat.
The combat is what done it. The combat is what pushed me into territory of being like, nah man, this ain't it.
Literally hold left or hold right, and as long as you keep alternating directions, you can just dodge and dodge and dodge.
It's either the easiest combat you've ever had or the worst combat. Why?
The combat is a mix of melee with the stun baton, a handful of different guns, and the GRP, or Gravity Restraint Projector, all of which can be upgraded. Oh yeah, there's also environmental hazards. It's a visceral and gore-filled ballet that seeks to shock you with its brutality. In fact, the combat is so over the top that the Japanese release was cancelled when the game didn't get a 0 rating due to the violent content, and Striking Distance Studios refused to change it.
Felt very raw, very real for the player, and that's a fantastic tool for really sort of cutting through the noise in some respects.
You know, just thinking about it, I'm like, man, that was really brutal.
The concept of brutality is, well, it's certainly useful.
Brutality is a very specific kind of trauma.
They don't pull punches at all in this game, and I was like, whoa.
You'll evade incoming attacks by holding the left stick in a direction and alternating between each strike. As much as people say they want something new, it's funny how often even a small change is completely torn apart. Now this mechanic isn't even all that new. It's just a twist on a dodge or a block seen in a million other games. But instead of holding or spamming a single button, you need to get the right rhythm for alternating the directions with the stick.
When you are facing more than 2 enemies, especially during the first 2 hours of the game, I thought that the game is broken. It is so hard to dodge 2 enemies at once, try and run, and try and reload your water pistol at the same time. For me, it just didn't work.
Right. So maybe, just maybe, you should change your tactics when surrounded. Okay, let's say melee isn't your thing. You want to shoot some dang guns. Well then shoot some dang guns. No lie, you can play 90% of this game using only firearms. Ammo is fairly plentiful and cheap to purchase, and the guns can wreck enemies, particularly when upgraded, or if you find some of the powerful hidden weapons. Boom! But this isn't Call of Duty. While the power fantasy builds over time, it's still a horror game, and should feel like it. So regardless of how you play, it's going to feel like an uphill battle, forcing you to bend the systems to your will to survive. Linear level design is another area that got slammed by critics.
Callisto Protocol is a linear game in the strictest and most literal definition of that term.
It's just point A to point B to point C.
From its excessively linear level design to its uninteresting ancillary systems.
Okay, can we agree that linear design isn't necessarily bad, and open world design isn't necessarily good? Some of the best games ever made are linear, and some of the most lifeless games are open worlds, and vice versa. It's all in how the levels are constructed, what you do in them, and how the design supports the overall story and gameplay. And for the most part, I'd say the design is solid. Not the most amazing, mind you, but there's a good mix of things to do, some incredible set pieces, and even the rewards for exploring off the beaten path. Might I remind you, the original Dead Space was mostly linear too. Did we all forget? Sure, you could explore the nooks and crannies of the USG Ishimura, and the hub areas have you branching out, but the story was consistently pushing you forward down corridors. And I'd say Dead Space was even more linear if you played it that way, since you could always see the exact path to your next objective. I've also heard a lot of requests for a map in Callisto. Look, I love a good map, but if the levels are really that linear, why would you need a map?
That is a really good point.
By not giving you a map or a go this way button, you're put into Jacob's mindset. You're in an unfamiliar, alien environment. You have to rely on your senses, pick up on environmental cues, and you'll never fully be at ease in the recesses of Callisto. I never felt lost, nor was it just a straight line path to progress. The last set of criticisms focused on the technical performance.
The issue is the stuttering. Oh my god, the stuttering I experienced, out of control.
It's not really anything other than a very janky project.
The performance was just so terrible that I had to run the game in low settings.
So yeah, it was a mess at launch. While there were some issues across all platforms, the PC performance was particularly jank-ridden with stuttering, visual glitches, progression-stopping bugs, and more. While the rage came pouring in, the development team didn't hide. They communicated updates directly to the fans about the progress and were very open about the cause. Glenn said that in the rush to hit the simultaneous launch date for all platforms, the wrong file was patched due to a clerical error. This explanation didn't exactly sit well with everyone. Now, I'm sure it was frustrating for the development team, but there is no one to blame for this other than themselves. Look, if studios stop relying so heavily on post-launch patches, they could avoid these issues that can kill their game's momentum. That being said, by no means was the Callisto Protocol the worst offender. Plenty of games have been released in far worse shape, but have redeemed themselves after fixing the problems. By the time I played the game, performance was rock solid, without any issues, which should have been everyone's day one experience. Okay, you've heard why you shouldn't have played the Callisto Protocol, but here's why now you absolutely should. First off, this game looks incredible. It's one of the most visually impressive games I've ever seen. God damn, just look at the nearly perfect capture of Josh Duhamel. The environments are beautifully rendered, packed with detail and clutter feeling lived in, that are slowly consumed by the biophage as the game progresses. The creature designs, while limited in variety, are horrific and imposing. The set pieces are these epic standout moments that are a sight to behold. And the gore-soaked combat you can just about taste. With impressive lighting that adds mood, life, and depth to every scene. Everything, and I mean everything, has been painstakingly crafted. With fantastic 3D audio design breathing life into each space and orienting you amongst the onslaught emerging from the darkness. On presentation alone, Callisto is worth experiencing, but it's not just about how it looks and sounds. Forget what you've heard about the gameplay. It's damn fun if you judge it on its own merits. Your footsteps feel weighty and purposeful. Exploration is rewarding. You'll be driven to seek out credits to upgrade your gear, eventually making you a force to be reckoned with. That, coupled with your own improving skills as you master the systems, feels great. The combat is chunky, over-the-top violent, and flexible. Play the way you want. Want to focus on guns? Then focus on guns. Want to practice your swing?
Swing away, Meryl.
Or mix it up. And hell, even the dodging feels good. There's no reason not to like a combat system that gives you options to play how you want. Striking Distance didn't give up on the game, continuously delivering updates and new content. So much was added, including 2 new difficulty modes, a Horde mode, and New Game Plus. And while this should have been part of the initial launch, it's here now, and the game's far better for their inclusion. Then there's Final Transmission. You know how some DLC is as good as the core game itself? Like Blood and Wine for The Witcher 3? Well, Final Transmission is definitely in that camp. The ventilation shafts have some surprises in store this time. The level design has been improved with more optional paths. And even the melee combat is stronger thanks to the kinetic hammer. This weapon is brutal and has the ability to perform a charged ground slam attack that does some serious damage. And no spoilers, but the last third is freaking epic. But so many never played the game, or bailed before it was cleaned up. And unfortunately, that meant sales were way below expectations. It's crazy that 2 million units sold is considered a flop, but it resulted in Striking Distance Studios having to lay off a sizable chunk of its staff, Gary leaving the company, and the future of the studio and Callisto Protocol all but certain. So, what lessons can we learn from this? First, developers need to stop relying on day one patches to save their games. Any who do earn all the criticisms they get for poor performance. Second, take reviews with a grain of salt, particularly when they all sound the same. Everyone is entitled to their own opinions, but it's easy to get influenced by groupthink when relying on experts. And lastly, we need to beware of our own hype levels. The hype drug is intoxicating, but just know you may be setting yourself up for a harsh comedown. Okay, what do you think about the Callisto Protocol? If you liked the video, hit like and subscribe, and if you want another game that you haven't played, check out my video right here. I want to thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.